The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in October. So subtle I almost missed it. I was reviewing quarterly earnings reports for three biotech companies when Michael walked into our home office, still knotting his Hermes tie with one hand while scrolling through his phone with the other. The morning light streaming through our Seattle penthouse windows caught the silver threading in his navy suit, a suit I'd helped him pick out when he got promoted to strategy director at Technova Solutions. "Coffee's still warm," I said without looking up from my Bloomberg terminal, where pharmaceutical sector numbers were painting a concerning picture. "And I think you should know that Meridian Biotech is about to tank. Their phase 3 trials are showing—" "Sarah, can we not do the market analysis thing this early?" Michael interrupted, his tone carrying that new edge I'd been hearing more frequently. "Some of us have actual meetings to prepare for." The words hit like ice water. I looked up from my three-monitor setup, where complex financial models sprawled across screens like digital spiderwebs. Michael was adjusting his cufflinks, the platinum ones I'd given him for our 5th anniversary, without meeting my eyes. "Actual meetings," I repeated slowly, "as opposed to my fake ones." He finally glanced at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, maybe, or just irritation at being caught. "You know what I mean. I've got the board presentation at 9, then the vendor negotiations. Then I saved Grandview Pension Fund $12 million last month by spotting accounting irregularities at Zenith Manufacturing," I said quietly. "The SEC cited my report in their investigation. Forbes quoted my analysis. But you're right, those were probably fake meetings too." Michael stopped fiddling with his cufflinks. We stared at each other across our home office, the space where I'd built a consulting practice that had quietly out-earned his salary for 3 of the last 4 years. The silence stretched until his phone buzzed. "I have to go," he said, already moving toward the door. "We'll talk about this tonight." But we didn't talk about it that night, or the next. Instead, Michael came home later and later, full of stories about innovative strategy sessions and visionary leadership from his new VP of Operations, a woman named Amanda Rodriguez, who apparently had revolutionary ideas about everything from market positioning to work-life balance. I'd met Michael at Stanford's business school 8 years ago, 2 broke MBA students surviving on ramen and shared dreams. We'd made a pact in that tiny library study room, whatever happened after graduation. We'd support each other completely. No competition, no jealousy, just pure partnership. "Business partners for life," he'd said, shaking my hand with mock formality. We'd kept that promise through his early struggles at tech startups, through my grueling years at Goldman Sachs, through the decision to leave New York for Seattle when Technova recruited him. I'd sacrificed a managing director track at one of Wall Street's most prestigious firms because I believed in us, because I thought we were building something together. Now I wasn't sure what we were building anymore. The real warning sign came 3 days later. Michael brought home Technova's quarterly report, tossing it on the kitchen counter like casual reading material. I flipped through it while he showered, my trained eye automatically scanning the numbers. Something was off. Revenue recognition patterns that didn't quite match industry standards. Research and development expenses that seemed to migrate between categories without clear justification. Subsidiary structures that were unusually complex for a company Technova's size. "Michael," I called toward the bathroom, "can you explain these offshore holdings? The Cayman subsidiary has some interesting—" "Sarah, please," his voice carried over the running water. "Not everything is a conspiracy. Some of us trust our colleagues to handle their areas of expertise." I stared at the numbers on the page, my Goldman Sachs training screaming warnings. These weren't conspiracy theories. They were red flags, the kind that made institutional investors nervous and attracted unwanted attention from federal regulators. But my husband, my supposed business partner for life, couldn't be bothered to listen. That night, I started a new file on my secure server. I labeled it Technova Analysis and began doing what I did best following the money. Amanda Rodriguez swept into our lives like a perfectly choreographed hurricane, and I didn't see the destruction coming until it was too late. I first heard her name in November, When Michael started peppering every conversation with references to her innovative methodologies and disruptive thinking. According to Michael, Amanda approached problems from angles that completely reframed the solution space. "She sounds brilliant," I said one evening over dinner at Canlis, trying to be supportive. "Maybe we should invite her over sometime. I'd love to meet the person who's contributed so much to your career development." Michael's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Amanda maintains an extremely demanding schedule, high-level strategic meetings, industry conferences, board presentations. She probably wouldn't have time for social gatherings. The way he said it made me feel small, like I was asking to introduce him to my yoga instructor rather than suggesting we host a colleague for dinner. Amanda's influence accelerated after that. Michael began dismissing my professional insights entirely, characterizing my consulting work as niche compared to his comprehensive corporate responsibilities. When I warned him about concerning trends in the tech sector's quarterly reports, he'd respond with whatever Amanda had said about market fundamentals and innovation metrics. "Amanda has an MBA from Wharton and 15 years of corporate strategy experience," became his standard deflection. "She understands market dynamics at a level that—" He never finished those sentences, but the implication was clear. I didn't. The transformation wasn't overnight. It was gradual, systematic, like watching someone slowly turn down the volume on our relationship until I could barely hear myself in my own marriage. 3 weeks before Christmas, I finally met her. The Technova holiday party was held at the Meridian Hotel, and Amanda spotted us the moment we entered the elegant ballroom. She glided across the room with the confidence of someone who owned every space she entered, which, given her position, she practically did. Tall and sharp-featured, Amanda wore a perfectly tailored burgundy dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her handshake was firm, her smile bright, and her eyes calculated every detail of my appearance in the 3 seconds it took her to say hello. "Sarah," finally, she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure nearby colleagues could hear. "Michael talks about you constantly. You must be so proud of how well he's doing here. We absolutely treasure him." "Thank you. He loves working here." "And you work from home, is that right?" Amanda's smile never wavered. "How wonderful that you have such flexibility with your schedule. Michael mentioned you help small investors with their portfolios. That's so thoughtful." The word thoughtful landed with surgical precision. Managing to diminish my entire career in a single syllable, I felt like I was being dissected by a professional. "I run a financial consulting practice specializing in equity analysis and fraud detection," I said, keeping my tone pleasant. "I work with pension funds, hedge funds, and institutional investors to identify accounting irregularities before they impact portfolios." "How interesting." Amanda's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite identify. "Ryan is so lucky to have someone who can be so adaptable with her career. Not every woman could be so flexible about her professional ambitions." Before I could respond, she was already turning to greet someone else, leaving me with a distinct impression that I'd been evaluated and found wanting. "She's impressive," I told Michael during our drive home, testing his reaction. "Isn't she incredible?" Amanda has this way of seeing right to the heart of complex problems. "She's been amazing for my career development." That night, I researched Amanda Rodriguez more thoroughly than I'd investigated most stock picks. LinkedIn showed an impressive trajectory: Northwestern undergrad, Wharton MBA, senior positions at 3 major corporations. But when I dug deeper, a pattern emerged that made my Goldman Sachs instincts tingle. Every company Amanda had worked for had experienced significant accounting restatements which were within 2 years of her departure. Not necessarily illegal, but curious. At Meridian Dynamics, revenue recognition issues had led to SEC inquiries. At Blackstone Innovations, suspicious subsidiary transactions had triggered investor lawsuits. Either Amanda Rodriguez was spectacularly unlucky, or she was very, very good at making problems disappear until after she'd moved on. I was about to dismiss it as coincidence when I found the connection that made everything click into place. Richard Sterling, Technova's CFO, had worked at two of Amanda's previous companies, at Meridian Dynamics. He'd been deputy CFO during the revenue recognition problems. At Blackstone Innovations, he'd overseen the subsidiary restructuring that had later raised regulatory questions. Amanda Rodriguez and Richard Sterling had a professional history of working together at companies that subsequently faced accounting scrutiny. Now they were both at Technova, with my husband reporting directly to Amanda and praising her strategic brilliance. I stared at my research notes until 2 a.m., watching patterns emerge like constellations in a previously dark sky. Amanda wasn't just Michael's demanding boss. She was potentially something much more dangerous. And she was systematically removing me from my husband's professional and personal world. The invitation arrived on elegant cream cardstock, embossed with Technova's logo in navy and silver. Annual Winter Gala, it read, an evening of celebration and recognition. Michael burst through our front door that Tuesday evening in March, practically vibrating with excitement. Pack your best dress, he announced, tossing his briefcase onto our Italian leather couch with uncharacteristic carelessness. We're going to the company gala next Saturday. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing concerning patterns in Technova's most recent quarterly filing. We're going to what now? The company gala, y'all. Amanda specifically insisted you come this year. His eyes were bright, almost manic. She said, it's time Sarah experienced the full Technova culture. This is huge, Sarah. The gala is where they announce major promotions, where the real networking happens. Amanda wouldn't have suggested you attend unless something big was coming. That word insisted sent ice water through my veins. After months of strategic exclusion from Michael's professional world, Amanda suddenly wanted me at the company's most important social event. My analytical mind immediately started calculating possibilities, and none of them were good. But Michael was already rifling through our walk-in closet, pushing hangers aside with unusual enthusiasm. Where's that emerald dress, the one you wore to the Fairmont charity auction last spring? I blinked in surprise. Michael hadn't commented on my clothing choices in months, yet he remembered a specific dress from nearly a year ago. It's behind the winter coats, I said slowly. Michael, are you sure about this? Amanda hasn't exactly been welcoming to. You looked incredible in that dress, he interrupted, his voice carrying a nostalgic warmth I hadn't heard in months. Amanda mentioned she's looking forward to seeing you in something elegant. She wants to make sure you feel included in our success. The week leading up to the gala felt surreal. Michael was suddenly attentive in ways that felt almost desperate, like he was trying to recapture some version of us that had existed before Amanda's influence poisoned everything. He brought me coffee in the mornings without being asked, inquired about my consulting work with what seemed like genuine interest, and even suggested we practice dancing in our living room. I want everything to be perfect Saturday night, he said, spinning me awkwardly around our coffee table to music from his phone. This could be the moment that changes our entire future. Despite every instinct screaming warnings, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe Amanda had realized that excluding me was counterproductive. Maybe she decided that accepting me was better than fighting me. Maybe this was her olive branch, her way of acknowledging that I was an important part of Michael's life, whether she liked it or not. I threw myself into preparation with enthusiasm I hadn't felt in months. A professional stylist arranged my hair in an elegant updo that made me feel sophisticated and confident. I spent hours researching Technova's recent acquisitions and strategic partnerships, memorizing details I could discuss intelligently at cocktail conversation. Tell me about the blockchain integration project. I practiced in front of our bathroom mirror. I read the preliminary market analysis was quite promising. For the first time in months, I felt like I was stepping back into my professional identity. The woman who'd once commanded respect in Goldman Sachs boardrooms was still there, just buried under layers of dismissal and diminishment. But as Saturday approached, subtle details began bothering me. Michael received multiple text messages about seating arrangements, venue logistics, and timing, all from Amanda. When I asked about dinner plans, he was vague. When I suggested we invite another couple to share a table, He said the arrangements were already finalized. Amanda's handling all the details, he explained. She wants to make sure we're seated strategically, with people who can be valuable connections for both our careers. The phrase both our careers should have reassured me. Instead, it felt ominous. Friday night, I had a dream about being on stage at Carnegie Hall, preparing to perform a piano piece I'd never learned. The audience was filled with faces I recognized but couldn't name, all watching expectantly while I sat frozen at the keyboard, my hands unable to remember which keys to press. I woke up Saturday morning with a distinct feeling that I was walking into something I wasn't prepared for. Despite all my careful research and planning, Michael was already in the shower, humming what sounded like a victory song. The Meridian Hotel lived up to every description Michael had given me. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors, and servers in crisp uniforms carried champagne flutes through crowds of elegantly dressed executives and their spouses. Walking through the lobby in my emerald dress and carefully styled hair, I felt confident and prepared. But the moment we entered the main ballroom, something shifted. Michael's hand on my back felt performative rather than supportive, like he was playing a role rather than naturally escorting his wife. Amanda approached us like a queen holding court, her silver gown catching the chandelier light with every calculated step. Her smile was theater bright, visible from across the room. "Sarah, you actually came." The emphasis on actually was subtle but unmistakable, designed to sound surprised and delighted while implying that my attendance was somehow unexpected. "Thank you for suggesting I join everyone," I replied, keeping my voice pleasant. "Well, Michael deserves to have his plus one here for such a special evening." The phrase plus one was delivered with surgical precision, reducing me from wife and partner to accessory in front of a room full of Michael's colleagues. I felt Michael's hand tighten slightly on my back, but he said nothing to correct Amanda's characterization. "Let me show you to your table," Amanda continued, her voice carrying enough volume to ensure nearby executives could hear every word. "I made sure you were seated with some lovely people who I'm sure will have fascinating things to discuss with you." She guided us through the ballroom toward an elegantly set round table near the center of the room. Other couples were finding their seats, checking place cards, settling in for what was clearly going to be an elaborate evening of corporate celebration. "Here we are," Amanda announced, gesturing toward the table. "Michael, you're at the leadership table. Of course, Sarah, your place should be right around here somewhere." My stomach dropped. We weren't sitting together. "Oh, didn't Michael explain that executives sit at the head table? Spouses have their own arrangements." Amanda's tone was apologetic but firm, as if this was standard protocol rather than another strategic separation. I began checking the small cream-colored place cards at each setting, reading names of people I didn't recognize. Jennifer Walsh, marketing coordinator; David Kim, regional sales manager; Sarah Chen, executive assistant. And then I found mine. The card was identical to all the others, cream cardstock, with elegant calligraphy in deep blue ink. But instead of my name, it read "Corporate Wife Nobody." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I stared at the card, reading it again to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The professional presentation somehow made it worse. This wasn't a spontaneous insult scrawled in anger. This was a carefully planned humiliation, designed and executed with the same attention to detail as the rest of the evening's arrangements. The laughter started as a ripple and built to a wave as people noticed the card and began pointing it out to others. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my goodness, did you see what her place card says?" I turned to Michael, expecting anger, outrage, or at minimum, some sign that he was as shocked by this cruelty as I was. Instead, I found him staring at his water glass like it contained the mysteries of the universe. His face carefully neutral, his shoulders tense with what I realized wasn't surprise, but discomfort at being caught in the middle of something he'd known was coming. "Michael," I said quietly, giving him one last chance to defend me, to show some sign that the man I'd married was still somewhere inside the stranger wearing his face. He couldn't meet my eyes. His silence stretched across the laughter and whispered comments, speaking louder than any words could have. In that moment, I understood with crystalline clarity that this wasn't just Amanda's masterpiece of public destruction. Michael was a willing participant in my humiliation. I walked toward the exit with my head held high, the place card still clutched in my hand. As I passed the CEO, David Park, who was chuckling at Amanda's brilliant joke, I leaned close to his ear. "I'd check your offshore subsidiaries if I were you," I whispered. The taxi ride home blurred past Seattle's glittering skyline, while tears I hadn't expected streamed down my face. But beneath the humiliation and heartbreak, something else was crystallizing. Something cold and analytical and very, very dangerous. Amanda Rodriguez had just made the biggest mistake of her carefully calculated career. She'd forgotten that the woman she was humiliating had the skills to destroy everything she'd built. And unlike Amanda, I played by the rules. I spent 3 days in bed after the gala, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of Saturday night. The laughter, Michael's silence, the CEO's smirk when I whispered my threat about offshore subsidiaries, the elegant calligraphy that had reduced me to corporate wife nobody. Sunday blurred into Monday, then Tuesday. Michael's keys never turned in the lock. His absence spoke louder than any apology could have. He was choosing Amanda's world over defending his wife. Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is Elena Vasquez from WSJ. We should talk. Coffee at Pike Place Market. 2 p.m. I think we have mutual interests regarding Technova Solutions." I stared at the message, my Goldman Sachs memories flooding back. Elena Vasquez. We'd worked together on a story about pharmaceutical fraud 3 years ago when I was still consulting full-time. She was sharp, fearless, and had a reputation for bringing down executives who thought they were untouchable. "How did you get my number?" I texted back. "David Park gave it to me. Turns out your whisper at the gala got his attention." Meet me, I hadn't left the penthouse since Saturday night. But something about Elena's message cut through my despair like caffeine through exhaustion. David Park had taken my warning seriously. The CEO of Technova wanted to investigate his own company. Pike Place Market buzzed with its usual chaos: tourists buying flowers, vendors hawking fresh fish, street musicians competing for attention. I found Elena at a small cafe overlooking Elliott Bay. Her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, laptop already open on the scarred wooden table. "You look like hell," she said without preamble, then softened. "Sorry, I heard what happened at the gala. Corporate culture can be brutal." I slid into the opposite chair, wrapping my hands around a coffee mug that felt like the first solid thing I'd touched in days. "How much did David Park tell you?" "Enough to know that Technova's recent financials have some interesting quirks, and that their newly promoted strategy director's wife happens to be one of the best forensic accountants on the West Coast." Elena leaned forward. "He also mentioned that certain executives might benefit from closer scrutiny. Amanda Rodriguez, among others, Sarah. I've been investigating a pattern of corporate fraud that spans multiple companies over the past 5 years. Shell companies, revenue manipulation, executive enrichment schemes. I think Technova might be the latest target." She turned her laptop toward me. The screen showed a complex flowchart connecting various corporations, dates, and names. At the center of the web was a name that made my pulse quicken: Richard Sterling. "Your husband's CFO has been very busy," Elena continued. "He's worked at 4 companies that later faced SEC investigations. Always leaves just before the problem surfaced publicly." I studied the chart, my analytical mind automatically processing the connections. And Amanda Rodriguez worked with Sterling at 2 of those companies. She's either incredibly unlucky or she's part of whatever Sterling's been doing. Elena paused. Or she's another victim. The possibility hadn't occurred to me. I'd been so focused on Amanda as Michael's manipulator that I hadn't considered she might be caught in someone else's web. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Elena's smile was sharp. "Everything you can find about Technova's financial structure. particularly anything involving offshore subsidiaries, research and development expenses, and executive compensation packages. And in return, justice, the kind that comes with federal indictments and congressional hearings. She closed her laptop. The kind that makes sure people like Richard Sterling can't destroy companies or marriages ever again. That afternoon, I sat in my home office for the first time since the gala, staring at my three monitors like they were old friends I'd neglected. My fingers moved across the keyboard with muscle memory I'd almost forgotten, accessing databases and analysis tools I'd maintained but barely used in months. The first thing I opened was Technova's most recent 10K filing. As I scrolled through pages of corporate legal language and financial tables, something I hadn't felt in years began burning in my chest, professional hunger. "Let's see what you've been hiding," I whispered to my screen. Within 2 hours, I'd found the first major irregularity. Revenue from software licenses was being recognized up front rather than over the contract term, a practice that inflated current earnings while creating future revenue shortfalls. The timing wasn't technically illegal, but it showed a pattern of manipulating quarterly results to meet Wall Street expectations. By evening, I'd uncovered a more troubling pattern. Research and development expenses were being shifted between Technova's various subsidiaries in ways that seemed designed to optimize quarterly reporting rather than reflect actual business operations. Costs would disappear from domestic operations and reappear in the Cayman subsidiary, where they had different tax implications and reporting requirements. But it was the executive stock option grants that made everything click into place. Every major grant was dated suspiciously close to announcements that would boost share prices. Someone with advanced knowledge of company news was making sure executives could profit before information became public. My coffee grew cold as I cross-referenced the option grant approvals with Amanda's signature authority. As VP of Operations, she had the power to approve certain executive compensation packages. Her signature appeared on documents covering the questionable grants, but the timing was too precise, too systematically advantageous. Either Amanda Rodriguez was the most gifted market timer in corporate history, or someone was providing her with information and instructions. I pulled up Richard Sterling's employment history and compared it with the pattern of suspicious grants. Every questionable decision coincided with periods when Sterling had direct access to material, non-public information on as CFO. "Sloppy," I muttered, highlighting another discrepancy. "Overconfident and sloppy." By 11 p.m., I had enough material to fill a preliminary regulatory complaint. But a complaint would take months to investigate, and I wanted faster results. I needed a different approach. The anonymous investor forum post took me until 2 a.m. to craft. I chose the username EquityWatchdog47 and wrote an analysis that would be impossible for serious investors to ignore. Red flags at Technova Solutions. A deep dive into concerning financial patterns. I included charts showing the correlation between executive stock transactions and company announcements, graphs illustrating the unusual timing of revenue recognition, and tables comparing Technova's accounting practices to industry standards. Everything was documented with precise citations to public filings and regulatory guidelines. The post went live Thursday morning at 6 a.m., timed to catch investors before market open. By noon, it had been shared across 3 major investment forums and cited in 2 financial blogs. By evening, I'd received the first email that would change everything. "Whoever you are, thank you. I've been suspicious of Technova's numbers for months, but didn't have the expertise to document it properly. Your analysis is spot on. There's more where that came from if you're interested. A concerned insider." I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. Someone inside Technova wanted to help expose the truth. For the first time since Saturday night, I smiled. The attached documents made my pulse race. Internal emails discussing ways to optimize quarterly reporting, meeting notes about delaying certain expense recognitions, and most damaging of all, a thread where Richard Sterling explicitly discussed timing announcements to maximize stock price impact around executive option grants. "We can shift the development cost to Q2 and announce the beta release this Friday." One email read, "That should give the stock a nice bump right before my options vest." Amanda's response was brief but telling. Approved. Finance team is on board with the accounting treatment. I saved everything to my encrypted drive and crafted a careful response to my anonymous contact. This is extremely helpful. Can you tell me more about the decision-making process for these accounting treatments, particularly who initiates the changes versus who approves them? The response came within hours. Sterling drives everything. Rodriguez signs off because she doesn't have a choice. He's CFO. She's operations. But lately, she's been asking more questions. I think she's getting uncomfortable. A pattern was emerging that made Amanda Rodriguez look less like a criminal mastermind and more like someone caught in Sterling's web. My Goldman Sachs training had taught me to follow the money and the power structure. Sterling had both. Elena called Thursday evening as I was reviewing Sterling's employment history more closely. I've been digging into Richard Sterling's background, she said without preamble. You need to see what I found. We met Friday morning at the same Pike Place cafe. Elena's laptop screen showed a news article from 2019. Meridian Dynamics CFO Richard Sterling cleared of wrongdoing in SEC investigation. Cleared doesn't mean innocent, I observed, scanning the article. What happened? Revenue manipulation scheme. Very similar to what you've documented at Technova. Sterling claimed he was following directives from the CEO and board. Investigators couldn't prove he initiated the fraud, so he got immunity in exchange for cooperation. Elena scrolled to another article. Same pattern at Blackstone Innovations in 2021. Sterling provided evidence against his superiors, walked away with a clean record and a recommendation letter. He's done this before, I said slowly. Set up accounting manipulations, then positioned himself as a cooperating witness when investigations started. Exactly, and each time he's brought Amanda Rodriguez with him to the next company. I think she might be his insurance policy. How so? Elena pulled up Amanda's LinkedIn profile. Look at her trajectory. Northwestern undergrad, Wharton MBA, but she's never held a CFO position despite having the credentials. Sterling keeps her in operations roles where she has signature authority, but not financial strategy control. The picture was becoming clearer. Amanda wasn't Sterling's partner. She was his fall guy, someone with enough authority to approve questionable decisions, but not enough power to initiate them independently. If Technova gets investigated, Sterling can claim he was following standard industry practices with operational approval from Amanda Rodriguez. I said, she takes the blame. He gets immunity again. Unless we can prove the pattern first. Elena closed her laptop. I need more evidence of their previous collaboration, something that shows this is a systematic scheme across multiple companies. That weekend, I dove deeper than I'd ever gone on any analysis. I cross-referenced SEC filings from Meridian Dynamics, Blackstone Innovations, and Technova, looking for patterns in accounting treatments, timing of announcements, and executive compensation. What I found was breathtaking in its systematic audacity. At each company, Sterling had implemented nearly identical practices: accelerated revenue recognition, strategic expense shifting, and precisely timed executive option grants. The accounting techniques were aggressive but usually legal. The timing was so consistently advantageous that it had to be coordinated. More damning was the paper trail I uncovered showing how Sterling had positioned Amanda at each company. Email chains discussing her valuable operational insights that justified her rapid promotions to positions with signature authority. Compensation packages that included substantial bonuses tied to quarterly performance, creating incentive for her to approve questionable accounting treatments. By Sunday evening, I documented a clear pattern of corporate manipulation spanning 3 companies over 5 years, with Richard Sterling as the architect and Amanda Rodriguez as the unwitting accomplice of it. But I'd also found something else. Recent emails suggesting Amanda was finally questioning Sterling's practices. I need to understand the rationale for shifting the R&D costs again. Amanda had written to Sterling just 2 weeks ago. Our auditors are going to notice the pattern. Sterling's response was curt. Leave the accounting to accounting. Your job is operational approval, not financial strategy. Amanda's reply made me pause. Richard, I've approved these treatments at 3 companies, Al. If there's regulatory scrutiny, I need to be able to explain the business justification. She was starting to see the pattern, and Sterling's dismissive response suggested he wasn't planning to protect her when the inevitable investigation began. Monday morning brought news that changed everything. Elena called at 7 a.m., her voice tight with excitement. Technova stock dropped 8% in overnight trading. Someone leaked portions of your analysis to institutional investors. I pulled up the stock chart on my Bloomberg terminal. Technova was down 12% in pre-market trading, with volume triple the normal level. Financial news sites were reporting concerns about accounting practices and questions raised by anonymous analysts. This is moving faster than I expected. I told Elena, it gets better. I just got a call from Senator Patricia Williams' office. She chairs the Senate Banking Committee's subcommittee on corporate fraud. They want to discuss Technova's practices. As I watched Technova's stock price continue falling throughout Monday morning, I realized the investigation had taken on a momentum of its own. Multiple regulatory bodies were taking notice. Institutional investors were demanding explanations. Media attention was intensifying. Richard Sterling's carefully constructed scheme was beginning to crumble under scrutiny, and Amanda Rodriguez was about to become the public face of Technova's problems unless someone intervened. The question was, did I want to save her, or let her take the fall for Sterling's crimes? My phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number. They're panicking. Emergency executive meeting, scheduled for this afternoon. Sterling is talking about limiting exposure and identifying liability risks. I think Amanda Rodriguez is about to be thrown under the bus. I stared at the message, understanding that Amanda had perhaps hours before Sterling made her the primary target of any investigation. It was time to make a choice about justice versus revenge. Tuesday afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Amanda Rodriguez directly. Sarah, her voice was strained, exhausted. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. We need to talk, I said. Not about Michael, not about the Gala, about Richard Sterling. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. When Amanda spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. How did you? I know what he's been doing, Amanda. And I know you're about to be blamed for all of it unless we do something. Another pause. I can't discuss company business with Meridian Dynamics, Blackstone Innovations. Now Technova, same pattern, same players, same outcome. Except this time, Sterling's made sure all the signatures are yours. I heard Amanda's sharp intake of breath. Where do you want to meet? The Pike Place market was crowding with evening commuters when Amanda arrived at our designated cafe. She looked nothing like the polished executive who'd humiliated me at the gala. Her usual perfect composure had cracked, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. You look like you haven't slept in days, I observed as she slid into the opposite chair. I haven't. Amanda's hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. Sarah, I need you to know that the place card was Sterling's idea. I finished. Let me guess he suggested it would be character building or help establish hierarchy or some other corporate psychology bullshit. Amanda's eyes widened. How did you know? Because humiliation is a classic manipulation tactic. Makes someone feel small and powerless, and they're less likely to question your authority. I leaned forward. He's been doing it to you for years, hasn't he? For a moment, Amanda's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. You don't understand. My family had a business, Rodriguez Import/Export. 3 generations, built from nothing. Richard Sterling was hired as CFO when my father got sick. She paused, staring at her untouched coffee. Within 18 months, SEC investigations, revenue recognition problems, federal tax liens, we lost everything. My father died thinking he'd failed as a businessman, never knowing that Sterling had systematically moved our assets into offshore accounts he controlled. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Sterling destroyed your family business, then offered me a job 6 months later, said he admired my resilience and wanted to help me rebuild my career. Amanda's laugh was bitter. I was desperate. No other firms would touch anyone associated with Rodriguez import-export. Sterling was my only option. And so he created your dependency, then exploited it. I felt a grudging respect for Sterling's systematic cruelty. Every promotion, every company move, he's been positioning you as his fall guy from the beginning. Amanda nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. At Meridian Dynamics, I started questioning some of the accounting treatments. Sterling said I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust his expertise if I wanted to succeed in corporate finance. When the SEC investigation started, he made sure my signature was on every questionable approval. But you got immunity because I cooperated completely, gave them everything, testified against the CEO and board. Sterling painted me as a naive operations manager who was misled by senior executives. Amanda's voice hardened. It was humiliating, but I thought it was over. Then he recruited you to Blackstone Innovations. Said it was a fresh start, that my cooperation with federal investigators actually made me valuable, proved I had integrity. Amanda shook her head. Same pattern, same outcome. By the time I realized what was happening, I was too deep in to get out without destroying my career completely. I studied Amanda's face, seeing exhaustion and fear rather than the calculating ambition I'd attributed to her. And now Technova. He promised this would be different, said he'd learned from previous mistakes, that we'd implement best practices from the beginning. Amanda's control finally broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. But it's the same scheme, just more sophisticated. And this time, he's made sure I have even more signature authority, which makes you the primary target when investigations start. The emergency board meeting is tomorrow. Sterling's prepared a presentation about operational oversight failures and inadequate internal controls. Every example points to decisions I approved. Amanda looked at me with desperate eyes. He's going to destroy me, just like he destroyed my family. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd systematically humiliated me was herself being systematically destroyed by the same man. Sterling had orchestrated both our suffering for his own benefit. Why did you humiliate me at the gala? I asked quietly. Amanda closed her eyes. Sterling said you were asking too many questions about Technova's financials, that Michael had mentioned your expertise in fraud detection. He wanted you neutralized. So you convinced Michael I was a threat to his career. Sterling suggested that a public embarrassment would make you less likely to interfere with company business, that if you felt excluded from Michael's professional world, you'd stop analyzing Technova's reports. Amanda opened her eyes, meeting my gaze directly. I knew it was cruel, but I was terrified of what Sterling would do if I refused. And Michael went along with it. Sterling convinced him that you were becoming obsessive about the company, that the humiliation would help you refocus on your own career. Amanda's voice was barely audible. Your husband thought he was protecting your marriage. I sat back, processing the layers of manipulation Sterling had orchestrated. He'd identified me as a threat, used Amanda to neutralize me, and convinced Michael that betraying his wife was actually protecting her. It was brilliant and sociopathic. Amanda, I need you to know something, I said. I'm the anonymous analyst who's been exposing Technova's practices. Her face went pale. Your equity watchdog 47. Sterling's scheme is unraveling because I documented everything he's been doing. SEC investigations, media attention, congressional interest, I triggered all of it. Amanda stared at me for a long moment. You could have destroyed me along with him. I still could. Your signature is on every questionable decision. But I don't think you're the real criminal here. What do you want from me? I leaned forward, making my decision. Help me prove Sterling orchestrated everything. Give me evidence showing how he manipulated you, how he's done this at multiple companies. In exchange, I'll make sure the investigation focuses on the real architect of these schemes. If I cooperate with you, Sterling will destroy what's left of my career. If you don't cooperate, Sterling will destroy you anyway. this time permanently. I pulled out my phone, showing her the most recent news alert. Technova's stock is down 18%. Federal investigators are opening inquiries. This is happening whether you participate or not. Amanda stared at the screen, then back at me. What do you need, Pickham? Everything. Emails, meeting notes, documentation showing how Sterling pressured you into approving questionable practices. Proof that this is a systematic pattern across multiple companies. I have recordings, she said quietly, of meetings with Sterling where he explicitly discussed manipulating quarterly results. I started recording everything after Blackstone Innovations, just in case. It was better than I'd hoped. How many recordings? Dozens. Every major financial decision for the past 2 years. Amanda met my eyes with something that looked like hope. But if I give these to you, there's no going back. Sterling will know I betrayed him. Amanda, he was never planning to protect you. You're the designated fall guy. This is your only chance to avoid taking responsibility for his crimes. She nodded slowly, then pulled out her phone. I'll send everything tonight. But Sarah, she paused. I know this doesn't make up for what happened at the gala, but I am truly sorry. You didn't deserve that humiliation. No, I didn't. But it taught me something important about who I was married to. I stood to leave, then turned back. Amanda, you're not your father. You don't have to let Sterling destroy another generation of your family's integrity. As I walked away, I realized the investigation had just become something much larger than revenge against the people who'd humiliated me. It was about exposing a systematic predator who'd spent years destroying companies and lives for personal enrichment. Richard Sterling was about to discover that he'd finally chosen the wrong victim. Amanda's files arrived at 11:47 p.m. Tuesday night, over 200 audio recordings, thousands of emails, and meeting notes that documented Sterling's manipulation in devastating detail. I spent all night reviewing the evidence, building a timeline that connected Sterling's practices across 3 companies over 5 years. The recordings were particularly damning Sterling's voice, calm and authoritative, discussing how to optimize reporting periods and manage regulatory perception. In one recording from just 6 weeks ago, Sterling was brutally explicit. Amanda, your job is to approve what I recommend. If anyone questions the accounting treatments, refer them to me. If there's ever an investigation, your cooperation will be noted and appreciated. Amanda's response was telling. Richard, I'm concerned about the frequency of these expense shifts. It's going to look deliberate. Let me worry about how things look. You just need to worry about your signature on the right documents. By dawn Wednesday, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier that would destroy Sterling's defense strategy before he could implement it. But as I prepared to send everything to Elena, my secure phone buzzed with an urgent message from Amanda. Emergency? Sterling knows about our meeting. He's moving against both of us. I called her immediately. What do you mean, moving against us? He confronted me an hour ago, said he had evidence of insider trading in my personal account and your consulting business. Amanda's voice was tight with panic. Sarah, he's going to claim we coordinated the stock manipulation for profit. My blood went cold. It was brilliant and diabolical. Sterling was going to frame both of us for the crimes he'd committed, using our cooperation as evidence of conspiracy. What evidence does he claim to have? Stock transactions and accounts linked to both of us. Puts and shorts against Technova placed just before the Equity Watchdog 47 reports were published. Amanda was clearly terrified. He said if I testified against him, he'd provide everything to federal prosecutors. I pulled up my brokerage accounts, scanning recent transactions. Nothing unusual. Nothing that could be construed as insider trading. But Sterling was CFO. He had access to systems and information that could create false evidence. Amanda, listen carefully. Don't go into the office today. Don't sign anything. Don't respond to any communications from Sterling. We need to move faster than he anticipated. Elena answered on the first ring when I called at 6 a.m. Sarah, what's wrong? Sterling knows we're investigating him. He's trying to frame Amanda and me for insider trading to discredit our evidence. Can he do that? He's CFO of a public company. He has access to trading records, financial systems, and enough technical knowledge to make false evidence look credible. I was already moving to my laptop, downloading everything to encrypted drives. How quickly can we get this to federal investigators? I can have preliminary information to the SEC and FBI by noon. But do it, everything we have, right now. Sterling's about to implement a sophisticated defense strategy that makes us look like co-conspirators. As Elena worked her contacts in federal law enforcement, I focused on protecting Amanda and myself from Sterling's false flag operation. I called my attorney, documented my actual trading history, and prepared a detailed timeline showing how Sterling had manipulated Amanda across multiple companies. The first sign of Sterling's counterattack came at 10 a.m., a news alert reporting Technova executives under investigation for insider trading. The article, clearly planted by Sterling's allies, suggested that recent stock volatility was caused by coordinated manipulation involving at least two individuals with advanced knowledge of company operations. My phone rang immediately. Sarah Mitchell. This is Agent Jennifer Park, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need to discuss some trading activity associated with your consulting business. Agent Park, I've been expecting your call. I have evidence that someone has created false trading records to discredit my investigation into Technova's accounting practices. Ma'am, you're not under arrest, but I strongly recommend you retain counsel before making any statements. I have counsel, and I have 200 audio recordings of Richard Sterling explicitly discussing how to manipulate quarterly earnings to benefit executive compensation packages. Would you like to hear them? The pause on Agent Park's end told me everything I needed to know. Sterling's preemptive strike had failed. The FBI was already investigating him based on Elena's information. Ms. Mitchell, we'd like you to come in this afternoon to discuss your evidence. And Ms. Mitchell, bring everything you have. By 2 p.m., I was sitting in a federal building conference room with Elena, Amanda, and a team of FBI agents and SEC investigators. The evidence we provided filled 6 bankers' boxes and included Sterling's own recorded voice detailing systematic fraud across multiple companies. Agent Park reviewed the timeline I'd prepared, then looked directly at Sterling's photograph in the case files. This individual has been very busy and very sloppy. Overconfident, I corrected. He never expected his victims to compare notes. 3 hours later, we watched through conference room windows as FBI agents arrested Richard Sterling in Technova's executive parking garage. He was so focused on his phone, probably trying to coordinate his defense strategy, that he didn't see them coming until they were placing handcuffs on his wrists. Amanda closed her eyes, tears of relief streaming down her face. It's finally over. No, I said, thinking about Michael, about the Gala, about all the other victims Sterling had left in his wake. It's just beginning. The Wall Street Journal's front page Thursday morning featured a photograph of Richard Sterling in handcuffs above the headline, Tech CFO arrested in multi-company fraud scheme. Elena's byline appeared beneath a story that detailed everything we'd uncovered: the systematic manipulation, the cross-company pattern, the sophisticated schemes that had defrauded investors of over $200 million across 5 years. I read the article at 5 a.m. in my home office, sipping coffee that tasted like victory. Every detail we'd painstakingly documented was there: the revenue recognition manipulation, the coordinated executive compensation schemes, the paper trail showing Sterling's involvement at 3 different companies. But it was the sidebar story that made me smile. Anonymous analyst's investigation triggers federal probe. Elena had crafted a masterful profile of equity watchdog 47, describing how a highly skilled forensic accountant had first identified the irregularities that led to Sterling's downfall. By 7 a.m., my secure phone was buzzing with messages from reporters, investors, and government officials. The anonymous analyst who'd brought down Richard Sterling was suddenly in high demand. Technova's stock opened down 23% in pre-market trading before the exchange halted it pending investigation. But within hours, something interesting happened. Institutional investors started buying. Word was spreading that Technova's problems were Sterling's problems. And with him gone, the company's actual fundamentals were solid. Sarah, you need to see this. Elena called at 9 a.m. David Park is holding a press conference. I pulled up the live stream to see Technova's CEO standing behind a podium in the company's main lobby, flanked by the board of directors and what looked like half the legal department. Yesterday's arrest of our former CFO, Richard Sterling, shocked and disappointed everyone at Technova Solutions. Park began. However, I want to be absolutely clear, the fraudulent practices detailed in federal charges represent Mr. Sterling's actions, not Technova's culture or values. He paused, consulting notes that I suspected had been heavily reviewed by attorneys. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators and have retained external auditors to review all financial practices from the past 3 years. We expect to complete this review within 60 days and issue restated financials that accurately reflect our company's performance. A reporter shouted a question about executive compensation, but Park held up his hand. Most importantly, I want to address the anonymous analyst whose investigation exposed these practices. Equity Watchdog 47, if you're watching, Technova Solutions would like to offer you a position as our Chief Financial Officer. We need someone with your expertise and integrity to rebuild trust with our investors and employees. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. The CEO of Technova had just offered me Richard Sterling's job on live television. My phone exploded with calls and texts. Elena, Amanda, my attorney, reporters from 3 different financial publications. But the call I was waiting for came at 11:30 a.m. Sarah, it's Michael. His voice was small, defeated. I saw the press conference. I saw the news about Sterling, about everything you uncovered. A long pause. I need to tell you that I'm sorry, not just for the tala, but for all of it, for not listening, for not defending you, for not seeing who you really are. I waited, letting the silence stretch. You were right about everything. He continued. The financials, Sterling's manipulation, Amanda being used. You saw it all, and I dismissed every warning because I was too proud to admit my wife was smarter than I was. Michael, I know I destroyed us. I know saying sorry doesn't fix what I did, but I need you to know that I'm resigning from Technova. I can't work for a company where my wife was humiliated while trying to protect everyone from fraud. It was the first time in months that Michael had sounded like the man I'd married, but it was also too late. I appreciate the apology, I said, but we both know this marriage ended at the gala. We just hadn't signed the papers yet. Sarah, please, we can start over. I'll do whatever it takes. You had the chance to stand up for me when it mattered. Michael, when I whispered my warning to David Park, I already knew our marriage was over. I was protecting the company despite how they treated me, not because of how you'd treated me. After I hung up, I sat in my office thinking about David Park's job offer, Chief Financial Officer at Technova Solutions. It would mean working with Amanda, rebuilding the company that had been the scene of my greatest professional and personal humiliation. It would mean facing down Sterling's remaining allies and implementing the kind of rigorous financial controls that would prevent future fraud. It would also mean giving up my consulting independence for corporate politics in board meetings and all the compromises that came with executive leadership. But as I looked at the Wall Street Journal article again, I realized something important. I wasn't the same woman who'd been humiliated at the gala 3 weeks ago. That woman had been hiding her capabilities to avoid threatening her husband's ego. This woman had just brought down a sophisticated fraudster using nothing but skill, determination, and careful documentation. At 2 p.m., I called David Park directly. Mr. Park, this is Sarah Mitchell. I believe we have something to discuss. Also, David Park's office on the 32nd floor of Technova Tower offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline. As I sat across from his massive desk Thursday afternoon, I could see the Pike Place market where Elena and I had first planned Sterling's downfall just 2 weeks ago. Ms. Mitchell, I want to be direct, Park began. Technova is in crisis. Our stock price has lost 30% of its value in 3 days. Federal investigators have seized 2 years of financial records. Our employees are terrified about their jobs. and our investors are demanding answers I don't have." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "But here's what I do know. You identified patterns that our auditors missed, our board oversight missed, and frankly, that I missed as CEO. You documented everything with precision that's impressed federal prosecutors. And you did it while being systematically excluded and professionally dismissed by people who should have been listening to you, including you," I observed. "You laughed at my humiliation at the gala." Park's face reddened. "Yes, I did. And I've regretted it every moment since I realized who you are and what you were trying to tell me that night." He paused. "Sarah, I need someone I can trust absolutely to rebuild Technova's financial credibility. Someone whose integrity has been tested under the worst possible circumstances. And you think offering me Sterling's job accomplishes that?" "I think offering you Sterling's job gives us the only chance we have of surviving this crisis with our reputation intact." I studied Park's face, reading genuine desperation beneath his corporate composure. "What happened to Amanda Rodriguez?" "Ms. Rodriguez has been placed on administrative leave pending the federal investigation. She's cooperating fully, but given her signature on multiple questionable documents." Park shrugged. "Her career at Technova is likely over." It was what I'd expected, but it still bothered me. Amanda had been Sterling's victim as much as his accomplice. But in the corporate world, signatures mattered more than intentions. "I want to make some things clear," I said. "If I take this position, I report directly to you and the board, not to any other executive. I have complete authority over financial reporting, auditing, and compliance. And I want Amanda Rodriguez retained as my deputy CFO." Park blinked in surprise. "Ms. Mitchell, given Ms. Rodriguez's involvement in the questionable practices, she was manipulated by a sophisticated predator who destroyed her family business and then exploited her desperation." I kept my voice level but firm. "Amanda has intimate knowledge of Sterling's methods and the motivation to ensure they're never repeated. She's also the most qualified operations executive you have. The optics of retaining someone who signed off on Sterling's schemes, the optics of firing Sterling's primary victim while promoting his primary opponent sends a clear message about what kind of company Technova wants to be going forward." I stood, preparing to leave. "If you're more concerned with appearances than justice, then you don't need someone with my expertise. You need a public relations firm." "Wait," Park held up his hand. "You're right. If Amanda Rodriguez was Sterling's victim, she deserves the chance to help fix what he broke." He paused. "What else?" "Complete transparency with federal investigators, even if it's embarrassing. Restated financials that err on the side of conservative accounting, and a commitment to implementing the strongest corporate governance standards in the tech industry, and your compensation expectations." I named a figure that made Park's eyebrows rise. It was less than Sterling had been making, but more than most CFOs at companies Technova's size. "You're paying for expertise that just saved your company from complete destruction. I think that's worth premium pricing." Park extended his hand. "Welcome to Technova Solutions, Chief Financial Officer Mitchell." As we shook hands, I realized I was making a choice I couldn't have imagined 3 weeks ago. Instead of walking away from the scene of my humiliation, I was taking control of it. Instead of letting Richard Sterling's crimes define Technova's future, I was going to rebuild the company around the principles he'd violated. "There's one more thing," I said. "I want to address the entire company next week. Every employee, every department. They need to understand what happened and how we're going to prevent it from happening again." "Of course. What will you tell them?" I thought about the place card that had read "Corporate Wife Nobody," about Michael's silence, about Amanda's tears in the Pike Place Cafe, about Sterling's arrogant assumption that he could manipulate and discard people without consequences. I'm going to tell them the truth, that integrity isn't just a corporate value statement, it's the foundation of everything we build, and that anyone who tries to compromise that integrity will face the full weight of accountability, regardless of their position or power. Friday morning's Seattle Times featured a photo of me shaking hands with David Park above the headline, "Anonymous Analyst Revealed as Technova's New CFO." The article detailed my Goldman Sachs background, my consulting success, and the investigation that had brought down Richard Sterling. But it was the quote at the end that captured what I really wanted to say. Financial fraud isn't just about numbers on spreadsheets. It's about betraying the trust of investors, employees, and families who depend on corporate integrity. My job is to make sure that betrayal never happens again at Technova Solutions. Reading those words in print, I realized the transformation was complete. The woman who'd been dismissed as corporate wife nobody was now the chief financial officer of a Fortune 500 company, with the power and responsibility to rebuild everything that had been broken. Sterling was facing federal charges that could result in decades in prison. Amanda was getting a second chance to build a career based on competence rather than survival. And Technova was getting the financial leadership it needed to regain investor trust. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just about punishment. Sometimes it was about giving people the opportunity to become who they were meant to be all along. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in Technova's main auditorium, looking out at 800 employees gathered for our quarterly all-hands meeting. The same ballroom where I'd been humiliated now hosted meetings where I presented financial results to the people whose livelihoods depended on corporate transparency. Q2 earnings exceeded analyst expectations by 12%, I announced, clicking to a slide showing steady revenue growth and improved profit margins. More importantly, our restated financials have been approved by both our external auditors and SEC reviewers. Technova is officially in full compliance with all federal reporting requirements. The applause was genuine, warm. These people had lived through months of uncertainty, wondering if their company would survive Richard Sterling's fraud. Now they were seeing the results of principled financial management. I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone whose contributions have been essential to our recovery. I continued. Deputy CFO Amanda Rodriguez has worked tirelessly to implement new internal controls and ensure that every financial decision meets the highest standards of transparency and accountability. Amanda, sitting in the front row, smiled and nodded as employees applauded. Her transformation over the past 6 months had been remarkable. Free from Sterling's manipulation, she'd emerged as a skilled, ethical executive whose operational insights had improved Technova's efficiency while maintaining rigorous compliance standards. After the meeting, Amanda and I walked to my corner office, the same space where Sterling had orchestrated his schemes. I'd redecorated completely, replacing his intimidating, dark furniture with light wood and glass that symbolized the transparency we were building. The Washington Post called, Amanda said, reviewing her notes. They want an interview about women in corporate finance for their Sunday magazine. And Senator Williams' office confirmed you're testifying before the banking committee next month about corporate governance reform. Anything from the Sterling trial. Jury deliberations continue, but the prosecutors sound confident. Amanda paused. Sarah, I got a call from my cousin in Los Angeles. She said Rodriguez Import/Export might be able to restart operations if we can clear the legal issues from Sterling's fraud. I looked up from the financial reports I was reviewing. Amanda, that's wonderful. I've been thinking about it seriously, about whether I want to try rebuilding my family's business. She sat across from my desk, the same chair where Sterling had probably planned my humiliation months ago. But I'd hate to leave Technova when we're just hitting our stride. You'd hate to leave, or you're afraid to leave. Amanda considered the question carefully. Both, I think. This is the first job I've had where I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to blame me for their mistakes. That's exactly why you should consider rebuilding your family business. You're not the same person who was desperate enough to accept Sterling's offer 6 years ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Jury reached verdict. Sterling guilty on all counts. Sentencing hearing set for next month. I showed Amanda the message. She closed her eyes, tears of relief streaming down her face. It's really over, she whispered. His part is over. Your part is just beginning. That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony overlooking Elliott Bay, sipping wine and reading congratulatory emails from colleagues, reporters, and government officials. The woman who'd been dismissed as a corporate wife, nobody had become a recognized expert in financial fraud prevention, with speaking engagements booked through the end of the year. My phone rang, displaying a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in months. Hello, Michael. Sarah, I saw the news about Sterling's conviction. I wanted to congratulate you on everything you've accomplished. His voice sounded different, humbler, more thoughtful. I'd heard through mutual friends that he was working at a smaller tech company, having taken a significant pay cut and title reduction after leaving Technova. Thank you. How are you doing? I'm learning, therapy twice a week, trying to understand how I became someone who could stay silent while his wife was being humiliated. A pause. I know it's too late for us, but I needed you to know that I'm working on becoming a better person. I'm glad to hear that, Michael, truly. The divorce papers were signed last week. I didn't contest anything. You earned every dollar of that settlement. Another pause. Sarah, I know I don't have the right to ask, but are you happy? I looked out at the Seattle skyline, thinking about the question. 6 months ago, I'd been a diminished version of myself, hiding my capabilities to avoid threatening a fragile marriage. Now I was rebuilding a Fortune 500 company's financial credibility while testifying before Congress about corporate reform. I'm exactly who I was always meant to be, I said. And yes, that makes me happy. After we hung up, I thought about the path that had led from that humiliating place card to this moment. Richard Sterling was facing 25 years in federal prison for systematic fraud. Amanda Rodriguez was considering rebuilding her family legacy. Michael Chen was learning to respect the expertise of women he'd previously dismissed. And Sarah Mitchell, the woman who'd once been called corporate wife nobody, was being invited to address the National Association of Corporate Directors about the importance of financial transparency in modern business. My laptop chimed with an email from a young woman named Jessica Park, no relation to Technova's CEO. She was a recent MBA graduate who'd read about my investigation and wanted advice about building a career in forensic accounting. Ms. Mitchell, she wrote, your story has inspired me to pursue financial fraud prevention as my specialty. Would you consider mentoring someone just starting out? I promise to work as hard as necessary to develop the expertise you've demonstrated. I smiled, thinking about the mentorship I'd never had at Goldman Sachs, the guidance that might have helped me recognize Sterling's manipulation earlier, the support that could have prevented years of diminished ambitions. Jessica, I replied, I'd be honored to mentor you. The financial world needs more women who aren't afraid to ask difficult questions and demand honest answers. When can we meet? As I hit send, I realized the cycle was complete. The victim had become the victor, the dismissed wife had become the respected expert, and the woman who'd been systematically diminished was now lifting up the next generation. Sterling had tried to destroy my credibility, but he'd only revealed my true strength. And that strength was going to be shared with every woman who refused to be silenced, dismissed, or underestimated. The pathetic gold digger nobody had become someone who could never be ignored again. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just about punishment or revenge. Sometimes it was about transformation of victims into victors, of shame into strength, and of silence into a voice that could change everything.